Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The rain struck the cemetery fence like bullets. Cashin Halvorsen pressed his fingers through the chain-link metal, watching the black umbrellas cluster around his father's grave. 40 yards away, close enough to see faces. Too far to hear words. He had gotten the call at 3:15 that morning. A neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, whispering into her phone. "I thought you should know. The service starts at 10. 6 hours notice for his own father's funeral. Water dripped from his hair onto his jacket collar. He had thrown on the first dark clothes he could find: jeans, a black sweater, dress shoes that were already soaked through. Everyone else wore proper funeral attire. Planned attire. The priest's voice carried on the wind, fragments of scripture about dust and ashes. Cashin recognized some faces. His father's old art dealer. A few neighbors. Roland's swimming buddy from the community pool. Then he saw her. Lorna stood at the head of the grave, draped in black silk that probably cost more than Cashin's rent. Her children flanked her like bodyguards. Camber wore sunglasses despite the gray sky, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Fleur held her phone low, probably live-streaming her grief to her followers. The priest finished his prayer. People began dropping flowers onto the coffin. Roland's friends approached Lorna with embraces and murmured condolences. She accepted them gracefully, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief that Cashin's fingers tightened on the fence. The crowd started to thin. Car doors slammed in the parking lot behind the mourners. Engines turned over. Cashin stayed where he was, watching the groundskeepers lower the coffin into the earth with mechanical precision. "You had your chance, Cashin." He turned. Lorna stood 10 feet away, outside the cemetery gates. Up close, her makeup was perfect. Not a single tear had disturbed her foundation. He moved on. She continued, her voice carrying that false sweetness he remembered from family dinners. "So should you." Camber appeared behind her, rolling his shoulders like he was warming up for a fight. "You shouldn't be here, man. This is family only." "I am family," Cashin said. Lorna smiled. The expression never reached her eyes. "We're family." Past tense. Fleur emerged from behind a headstone, still holding her phone. "This is so awkward. Like, can't you just respect our grief?" "Your grief." Cashin stepped closer to the fence. "You knew him for what? 6 years. Long enough to know he didn't want you here," Lorna said. "He told me so himself. Multiple times." The lie hit him like a slap. But Cashin's expression didn't change. He had learned long ago not to give Lorna ammunition. "Interesting," he said, "since he called me 3 weeks ago asking when I was coming to visit." Lorna's smile flickered. "Just for a second. People say things," she said. "Doesn't mean they mean them." A groundskeeper approached the grave with a shovel. The first pile of dirt hit the coffin with a hollow thud. Cashin watched his father disappear beneath the earth, one shovelful at a time. "We should go," Camber said, checking his watch. "The reception starts in an hour." "Reception?" Cashin looked at them. "At the house," Fleur said. "Our house. Where we live. Where Dad lived." "You're not invited," Lorna added, as if clarifying a minor detail. They walked away without looking back. Cashin stayed at the fence until the grave was completely filled and the groundskeepers had left. Then he stood there longer, watching the rain turn the fresh dirt into mud. His father was gone, and Cashin hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye. The law office of Dinsley and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building in downtown Maple Hollow. Cashin arrived 10 minutes early and sat in his car, watching the entrance through rain-streaked windows. Petit exactly 2 o'clock. Lorna's white Mercedes pulled up to the curb. She emerged wearing a navy dress and pearls, every inch the grieving widow, seeking closure. Camber and Fleur followed, both dressed like they were attending a business meeting. Cashin waited another minute, then got out of his car. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt eternal. Cashin stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. 3 days of stubble, a wrinkled button-down shirt, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent 72 hours trying to make sense of his father's death. The receptionist directed him to conference room B. Through the glass walls, He could see Lorna seated at a polished table, her children on either side. Mark Densley, the lawyer, sat across from them, sorting through papers. Cashin pushed open the door. "Good afternoon," he said. Lorna's head snapped up. Her perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment before reassembling itself. "Mr. Halvorson," Mark said, standing. "I wasn't expecting. This is only for heirs named in the will," Lorna interrupted, her voice sharp. Cashin reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "I figured you'd say that." He handed the folder to Mark. The lawyer opened it, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline as he read. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. 40. A full minute. Mark's face went pale. "What is it?" Lorna demanded. Mark held up a document. Official letterhead. Notary seal. Roland's signature in blue ink. "This is a newer will," Mark said quietly. "Dated 2 months ago." Lorna's smile died completely. "That's impossible," she said. "I was with Roland constantly in his final months. He never met with another lawyer." "He didn't need to," Cashin said. "He had this notarized at the bank. 2 witnesses. Completely legal." Camber leaned forward. "What does it say?" Mark cleared his throat. "It revokes all previous wills and testaments. The entire estate goes to Cashin Halvorson, with the exception of Mrs. Lorna Halvorson's personal belongings and a modest cash settlement for her children." The room went dead silent. "How much is modest?" Fleur whispered. 10,000 each. Mark said. Fleur made a choking sound. Camber slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "Dad wouldn't do that to us." "He wasn't your dad," Cashin said quietly. "He was more of a father to me then." "Then what?" Cashin's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Finish that sentence." Camber's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked to his mother for backup. Lorna stared at the will as if it might burst into flames. "This has to be contested." Roland wasn't in his right mind. He was on medications, confused. The will was witnessed by 2 bank employees, Mark said. "There's also a video recording of the signing. Mr. Halvorson appears completely lucid and aware of his decisions." "A video?" Lorna's voice cracked. "Standard procedure for estate documents at First National," Mark explained, "to prevent exactly this kind of dispute." Lorna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is a setup." Cashin manipulated a sick old man. "Careful," Cashin said. The word came out like ice. She stopped talking. "The estate transfer will take approximately 30 days to complete," Mark continued, his professional demeanor barely concealing his discomfort. "Mrs. Halvorson, you'll need to vacate the property by 1 month." Fleur shrieked. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Cashin said. He stood and walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Lorna? Don't touch anything in Dad's studio. Consider it a crime scene." He left them sitting in stunned silence. Cashin's apartment was exactly what someone would expect from a 30-year-old swim coach, functional and sparse. A fold-out couch, a card table that served as both desk and dining room, a mini fridge humming in the corner. But the card table told a different story now. Printouts covered every inch of its surface. Bank statements, phone records, medical prescriptions, email exchanges between Cashin and his father dating back 2 years. And in the center of it all, a leather-bound journal with Roland's handwriting scrawled across every page. Cashin had found the journal hidden in his father's studio, tucked behind a canvas. Lorna had missed it during her sweep of unnecessary clutter. He opened to a random page and read his father's familiar script. "March 15th, Lorna suggested I stop seeing Dr. Martinez. Says he's filling my head with negative thoughts about the family." Asked what negative thoughts. She changed the subject. March 22nd, tried to call Cashin. Lorna said the phone wasn't working. Checked it later. Phone works fine. April 3rd, Lorna cleaned out my desk. Threw away Cashin's letters. Said they were depressing me. Found them in the trash. Hidden them in the studio. Cashin flipped to the last entry, dated just 3 weeks before Roland's death. "If anything happens, Cashin will understand. He's always been the one who sees past the show." Lorna thinks she's clever, but Cashin knows. He's always known. The boy sees everything. the boy. Roland had called him that since childhood, even after Cashin towered over his father at 6'2". Cashin set the journal aside and picked up his phone. Luis answered on the first ring. "Tell me you found something," his friend said without preamble. "More than something," Cashin said. "Can you meet me tonight?" "Already on my way." "Order pizza. This is going to take a while." Cashin hung up and returned to the papers. Somewhere in this mess was proof of what Lorna had done. He just had to find it. The pattern was subtle, but clear once he knew what to look for. Roland's social circle had shrunk dramatically in his final year. Old friends stopped calling. Doctor appointments were canceled and rescheduled. Prescriptions appeared for medications Roland had never needed before. All of it orchestrated by a woman who had convinced everyone she was protecting a confused old man. But Roland hadn't been confused. He had been trapped, and now he was dead. Luis Renner arrived at 8:30 with 2 large pizzas and a box of legal pads. He spread the food across Cashin's coffee table, then surveyed the documents scattered across the card table. "Jesus," he said, "you've been busy." Cashin handed him a beer and pointed to a stack of medical records. "Start with those. Tell me what you see." Luis had been Cashin's closest friend since they were 12. While Cashin had thrown himself into competitive swimming, Luis had become obsessed with law and order. Even as kids, he could spot injustice from a mile away. Now, at 30, he worked as a junior prosecutor in the King County District Attorney's Office, and he owed Cashin more favors than either of them could count. "Your dad's medical history," Luis said, scanning the first document. "Looks normal for a 70-year-old. Arthritis medication, blood pressure pills, weight." He frowned. "What's this?" He held up a prescription dated 6 months before Roland's death. "Risperidone? That's an antipsychotic. What was your dad taking this for?" "That's what I want to know," Cashin said. "Check the doctor's name." "Dr. Amanda Chun, internal medicine." Luis grabbed his phone and started typing. "Let me look her up." While Luis searched, Cashin pulled out a manila folder. "These are all the visitors who came to see Dad in his last 6 months. I got the list from Mrs. Patterson next door. She keeps track of everything. Neighborhood watch. Neighborhood gossip. Same thing." Cashin opened the folder. "Look at the dates." Luis compared the visitor log to the medical records. His expression darkened. "Your dad started seeing this new doctor right after Lorna restricted his visitors," he said. "And look at this, the first prescription for risperidone came 3 days after his last phone call to you." "Keep going." Luis pulled out another document. "Here's a receipt from something called Memory Care Solutions. It's a clinic that specializes in dementia and Alzheimer's evaluations." "Dad never went there," Cashin said. "I checked. They have no record of him as a patient. So why does Lorna have a receipt? Maybe she needed documentation that he was incompetent, for insurance purposes, or to justify why he couldn't make his own decisions." Luis leaned back against the couch. "This is elaborate. She isolated him, drugged him, and created a paper trail to support claims of mental incompetence, all while positioning herself as the devoted caregiver. And when he figured out what was happening, he updated his will, without telling her." Luis grinned. "Smart man. But this is going to be hard to prove in court. It's all circumstantial." Cashin stood and walked to his bedroom. He returned with a small digital recorder. "Not all of it," he said. "What's that?" Dad started recording conversations in his final months. Said he was worried about his memory. Wanted to keep track of important discussions. Cashin pressed play. Roland's voice filled the small apartment, thin but clear. "I want to change my will, Lorna. I've been thinking about it for weeks." "Roland, honey, you're not thinking clearly. Remember what Dr. Chin said about your medication affecting your judgment. My judgment is fine. I want Cashin to inherit the studio and the house." Cashin doesn't even visit anymore. He's moved on with his life. Why would you burden him with all this responsibility? "Because he's my son, and because I trust him." "You're having another episode. Let me get your pills." "I don't want the pills. They make me foggy. I want to call my lawyer. We'll discuss it tomorrow when you're feeling better." The recording ended. Luis stared at the device. She's gaslighting him. Classic manipulation technique. "There are 17 more recordings," Cashin said, all showing the same pattern. She convinced everyone, including Dad's doctor, that he was losing his mind. But listen to his voice. Does he sound confused to you? He sounds like a man trying to protect his legacy from someone who's stealing it. Exactly. Cashin ejected the recording device's memory card. Can you use this? In a criminal case? Probably. The recording laws in Washington are pretty flexible for conversations in your own home. Louise pocketed the card. I'll need to verify the authenticity, but this is solid evidence of elder abuse. What about the will fraud? That's trickier. She presented an older will, not a forged one. But if we can prove she knew about the newer will and deliberately concealed it. Louise shrugged. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Cashin returned to the card table and pulled out a phone bill. Dad called the bank 17 times in his last month, always when Lorna was out of the house. He was setting up that final will, and she had no idea. Oh, she suspected something. Look at this. Cashin showed Louise a credit card statement. 3 charges to a private investigator named Davidson Security, all in Dad's final month. She was having him followed, or having his activities monitored. The question is what she found out and when. Louise stood and began pacing the small apartment. Okay, here's what we know. Lorna isolated your father, possibly drugged him, and convinced his medical team that he was mentally incompetent. When he started taking legal action to protect his estate, she hired someone to watch him. But she was too late to stop the new will. And when Dad died, she presented the old will hoping no one would know about the new one. Except you showed up. Louise grinned. She must have been pissed. That's putting it mildly. So what's our next move? Cashin looked at the chaos of papers covering his table. Somewhere in this mess was enough evidence to destroy Lorna's claims and expose what she had done to his father. We need more than documents and recordings, he said. We need witnesses, people who saw what she was doing. What about the studio manager? Callum something? Callum Ridge. He worked with Dad for 15 years until Lorna forced him out. Forced him out how? Made Dad's life miserable until he fired Callum to keep the peace. It broke Dad's heart. Callum was like family. Louise grabbed his jacket. Then let's go talk to family. The lumber yard sprawled across 5 acres of muddy ground on the outskirts of Maple Hollow. Cashin and Louise found Callum Ridge operating a forklift in the back corner, moving pallets of 2x4s like they weighed nothing to T-56. Callum still moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades handling priceless artwork. His hands were scarred from years of building frames and moving sculptures, but his touch remained gentle. He saw Cashin approaching and shut off the forklift. I wondered when you'd show up, he said, climbing down from the driver's seat. Callum. Cashin extended his hand. This is Louise, my friend from the prosecutor's office. Callum shook both their hands, studying Louise with sharp eyes. Prosecutor, huh? This about your stepmother. What makes you say that? Because she's a thief and a liar, and your father knew it. Callum pulled off his work gloves. My shift ends in 10 minutes. Wait for me by the gate. 20 minutes later, they sat in a diner across from the lumber yard. Callum ordered coffee and a piece of apple pie. Cashin and Louise stuck to coffee. I worked for your father for 15 years, Callum began. Never had a problem until she showed up. First few months were fine. She was sweet, supportive, all the things a lonely widower wants to hear. When did it change? Louise asked. About a year after they married. She started inserting herself into the business side, asking questions about sales, about collectors, about the value of pieces. Your father thought she was just taking an interest. But you knew better, Cashin said. I knew her type. I grew up with a mother just like her. Charming on the outside, poison on the inside. Callum sipped his coffee. She started making suggestions. Maybe Cashin didn't need to visit the studio so often. Maybe some of the older pieces should be sold to make room for new work. Maybe I was getting too old to handle the physical demands of the job. How did Dad react? At first, he pushed back, but she was patient, persistent. She'd plant a seed, then back off for a few weeks. Let it grow. Then she'd bring it up again, like it was his idea. Louise leaned forward. What kind of seeds? That you were only interested in your inheritance, Callum said to Cashin. That I was taking advantage of your father's generosity. That the studio was too much work for a man his age. And he believed her. Eventually, she was very good at timing her attacks. Wait until your father was tired or sick, or feeling lonely. Then hit him with just enough doubt to make him question himself. Cashin's jaw tightened. When did he fire you? 6 months ago. Said he needed to simplify his life, focus on his health. I could see it was killing him to say it, but by then she had him convinced it was the right thing to do. Did you stay in touch? Tried to, but she screened his calls, filtered his mail. Made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. Callum finished his pie, but your father was smarter than she gave him credit for. He found ways to reach out. What do you mean? Callum pulled out his phone and scrolled through his text messages. Look at this. 3 weeks before he died. He showed them a message from Roland's number, Ascendancy Safe. Storage Unit 247, West Side Self-Storage. Under name, Peterson. C will understand. Ascendancy? Luis asked. Your father's final sculpture. Callum explained to Cashin. He'd been working on it for 2 years. Worth at least $3 million, maybe more. It disappeared from the studio right after his death. Lorna probably sold it already, Cashin said. No, she tried, but she couldn't find it. Your father moved it before he died. Callum grinned. Smart man. He knew she'd come for his best pieces first. So it's in a storage unit? Peterson was your father's middle name, Callum said. He opened the unit under that alias 6 weeks before he died. Paid a year in advance. Louise pulled out a notebook. Do you know what else might be in there? Knowing your father? Everything he didn't want her to get her hands on. They drove to West Side Self-Storage in Luis's car. The facility manager, a bored-looking woman in her 40s, barely glanced at the death certificate and will before handing over the unit key. Unit 247 is in the back row, she said. Bring the key back when you're done. The storage unit was larger than Cashin had expected, about the size of a one-car garage. When Callum rolled up the metal door, they found themselves staring at a treasure trove. The sculpture dominated the space, a bronze figure reaching toward the sky, every muscle and sinew captured in perfect detail. Even in the dim light of the storage unit, it was breathtaking. But it wasn't alone. Stacked against the walls were paintings, sketches, and smaller sculptures. A lifetime of Roland's work, carefully wrapped and protected. And in the back corner, a wooden crate marked fragile in Roland's handwriting. What's in the box? Luis asked. Callum pried off the lid with a crowbar they found hanging on the wall. Inside, wrapped in bubble plastic, was a video camera and a stack of notebooks. His studio journals, Cashin said, recognizing his father's handwriting on the covers. I thought Lorna destroyed these. She destroyed the copies, Callum said. These are the originals. Luis picked up the video camera and checked the display screen. There's something recorded on here. He pressed play. Roland's face appeared on the small screen, older and thinner than Cashin remembered, but his eyes were sharp and alert. My name is Roland Halvorsen. Today is April 15th, 2024. I am recording this video to accompany my final will and testament, which I had notarized this morning at First National Bank. Roland paused, looking directly into the camera. I want to be very clear about my mental state. I'm not confused. I'm not suffering from dementia or any other cognitive impairment. The medications that my wife, Lorna, claims are for my mental health are actually antipsychotics that she convinced my doctor to prescribe based on false information about my behavior. Cashin felt his breath catch in his throat. I am changing my will because I have discovered that Lorna has been systematically isolating me from my friends and family while positioning herself to inherit my estate. She has restricted my visitors, monitored my phone calls, and convinced my medical team that I am incompetent to make my own decisions. Roland leaned closer to the camera. Lorna is not to touch my legacy. Everything I have built, everything I have created, belongs to my son, Cashin. He is the only person I trust to preserve my work and protect my memory from those who would exploit it for profit. The video continued for another 10 minutes, with Roland methodically documenting Lorna's manipulation and abuse. When it ended, the storage unit was silent except for the hum of traffic from the nearby highway. Holy shit, Luis whispered. Callum was reading one of the studio journals, his face grim. It's all here. Every lie she told, every doctor she manipulated, every friend she turned against him. Your father documented everything. Cashin took the journal and flipped through pages of his father's careful handwriting. Dates, times, conversations, medical appointments. A complete record of psychological warfare. She killed him, Cashin said quietly. Not literally, Louise said, but she destroyed his will to live. Isolated him from everyone who cared about him. Made him a prisoner in his own home. And when he tried to fight back, she had him declared mentally incompetent. Callum closed the journal he was reading. What are you going to do with all this? Cashin looked around the storage unit at his father's hidden legacy. The sculpture caught the light from the open door, its bronze surface gleaming like fire. I'm going to destroy her, he said. Mark Densley's office felt different the second time around. The polished conference table seemed smaller. The leather chairs, less impressive. When you held evidence of fraud in your hands, corporate luxury lost its intimidating power. Cashin sat across from the lawyer, a banker's box of documents on the floor beside him. Louise flanked his left side, legal pad ready. They had spent 3 days organizing Roland's hidden records into a timeline that told the complete story of Lorna's manipulation. Mr. Densley, Cashin began, I think you should see something. He placed the video camera on the table and pressed play. Mark watched Roland's testimony in complete silence, his face growing paler with each accusation. When the video ended, he sat back in his chair and removed his glasses. This changes everything, he said finally. It proves you were duped, Louise said. Mrs. Halvorson presented an outdated will while concealing knowledge of the newer document. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. And elder abuse, Cashin added. Systematic isolation, medical manipulation, financial coercion. It's all documented in his journals. Mark put his glasses back on and reached for his phone. I need to call the authorities. Already done, Louise said. I've opened a preliminary investigation through the district attorney's office. We'll need your full cooperation. Of course. But what about the estate transfer? Technically, I'm still Mrs. Halvorson's attorney until... No, you're not. Cashin slid a document across the table. Dad fired you in this letter, dated 2 weeks before his death. He hired Patricia Walsh to handle the new will. Mark read the letter, his professional composure finally cracking. He fired me because he thought I was working with Lorna? Weren't you? Cashin's voice was flat, emotionless. I had no idea what she was doing. She told me your father was suffering from early-stage dementia. She had medical documentation, witness statements, forged medical documentation, coerced witness statements. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know. That was the point. Cashin stood. But you should have asked more questions. Should have insisted on speaking to Dad directly instead of letting her filter everything through herself. Mark's face flushed red. I followed proper procedures. You followed lazy procedures, Louise interrupted. You took the word of someone with obvious financial motivations instead of protecting your client's interests. What do you want from me? Cashin picked up the video camera. Full disclosure. Everything you know about Lorna's claims, her documentation, her timeline. And I want you to call her right now and tell her the estate transfer is suspended pending investigation. She'll demand to know why. Tell her the truth. Tell her we found the real will. Mark reached for his phone with shaking hands. He dialed Lorna's number and put the call on speaker. She answered on the second ring. Mark? Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you for days. When can we finalize the estate transfer? Camber has some investors interested in the property, and Mrs. Halvorson. Mark interrupted. I'm calling to inform you that the estate transfer has been suspended. Silence. Suspended? What do you mean suspended? We've discovered evidence that your late husband executed a more recent will that supersedes the document you provided. That's impossible. I was with Roland constantly in his final months. He never. The will is dated 2 months before his death and was properly witnessed and notarized. I don't believe you. I want to see this supposed will immediately. It's already been filed with the court. You'll receive a copy within 48 hours. Another long silence. This is Cashin's doing, isn't it? Her voice turned cold. He's manipulating you just like he manipulated Roland. That boy has been poisoning my husband against me for years. Mrs. Halvorson, I recommend you contact your own attorney. I don't need an attorney. I need you to do your job and protect my family from Cashin's lies. I'm afraid I can no longer represent you in this matter. There appears to be a conflict of interest. A conflict of... The line went dead. Mark set down his phone and looked at Cashin. She's going to fight this. Let her fight. She'll lose. Are you sure? She's not going to go quietly. She has resources, connections. And I have the truth. Cashin gathered his documents and stood. Plus something else she doesn't expect. What's that? I'm my father's son. And I don't forgive. That evening, Cashin sat in his apartment working on his laptop. Luis had gone home hours ago, but Cashin wasn't finished. He had spent the day creating a detailed timeline of Lorna's abuse, cross-referenced with medical records, bank statements, and witness testimonies. Now he was writing something else entirely. IT 1030. He clicked publish on a blog post titled "The Woman Who Stole My Father's Voice." The blog belonged to Pacific Northwest Art Quarterly, a small but influential publication read by collectors, dealers, and journalists throughout the region. The post began simply, "My name is Cashin Halvorsen. My father, Roland Halvorsen, was a respected sculptor and painter who died last month under circumstances that his family is now investigating. What you're about to read is the documented story of elder abuse, manipulation, and attempted fraud perpetrated by someone my father trusted with his life." Cashin had included carefully selected excerpts from Roland's journals, quotes from the video testimony, and a timeline showing how Lorna had systematically isolated his father from his support network. He had been careful to stick to provable facts, avoiding speculation or emotional language. The post ended with a simple statement. "My father spent his final months as a prisoner in his own home, cut off from his friends and son, drugged into compliance by someone who saw his legacy as her retirement plan. He fought back the only way he could by protecting his life's work and ensuring it would pass to someone who would honor his memory rather than auction it to the highest bidder." This is his story. This is his voice. And now, finally, people will hear it. By midnight, the post had been shared 17 times. By morning, it would be everywhere. Cashin closed his laptop and went to bed. Tomorrow, Lorna would wake up to find her reputation in ruins and her legal position destroyed. That IT was exactly what she deserved. Cashin's phone started buzzing at 6:15 in the morning. The first call was from a reporter at the Seattle Times. The second was from a producer at King 5 News. By 7 o'clock, he had received interview requests from 3 television stations, 2 newspapers, and a documentary filmmaker. The blog post had exploded overnight. Pacific Northwest Art Quarterly's website had crashed twice from traffic overload. The post had been shared over 300 times on social media, picked up by regional news outlets, and forwarded through email chains across the Seattle art community. Roland Halvorsen might not have been famous outside of Northwest art circles, but within that community, he was beloved. The revelation that his widow had allegedly manipulated and abused him had triggered outrage among collectors, gallery owners, and fellow artists. Cashin ignored most of the interview requests, but he agreed to speak with Jennifer Walsh from the Seattle Times. She was a veteran arts reporter who had written about his father's work for over a decade. They met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill at 9 o'clock. Jennifer brought a tape recorder and a photographer. Cashin brought copies of Roland's journals and a storage unit key. "I've covered your father's career for 12 years, Jennifer said, setting up her recorder. "I interviewed him dozens of times. The man I knew would never have cut his son out of his will." "That's because he didn't," Cashin said. "The will Lorna presented was 5 years old. Dad wrote a new one 2 months before he died. And she knew about it. She suspected. She had him followed in his final weeks. Hired a private investigator to monitor his activities." Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "You have proof of that?" Cashin slid a credit card statement across the table. 3 charges to Davidson Security, each for $2,500. What did the investigator find? Dad was careful. He only visited the bank when Lorna was out of the house. Used cash for most transactions. But the investigator must have reported something because Lorna increased her control in those final weeks. How so? Changed the locks on his studio. Told his doctor he was having memory problems and needed stronger medication. Started screening all his phone calls. Cashin paused. She was preparing to have him declared mentally incompetent. Jennifer made notes in her pad. But he died before she could complete the process. Convenient timing. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. She isolated him, drugged him, and terrorized him in his own home. The stress of that treatment could have contributed to his death. The photographer snapped pictures of the credit card statements and journal pages. Jennifer read Roland's handwriting, her expression growing darker with each entry. "This is systematic abuse," she said finally. "That's what I've been trying to tell people." "What's your next step?" "Legal action. Luis, my friend at the DA's office, is building a case for elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. The civil case is just the beginning." And Lorna's response: "She's trying to control the narrative. Claims I manipulated Dad when he was vulnerable. Says the journals are fabricated. The video is coerced." Cashin smiled coldly. "She's welcome to try proving that in court." Jennifer packed up her recorder. "When will this story run?" "Tomorrow's front page." That afternoon, Cashin drove to West Side Self-Storage to check on his father's hidden collection. He found a small crowd gathered outside Unit 247, 3 people with cameras and notebooks, obviously reporters who had tracked down the storage location. "Mr. Halvorsen," one of them called. "Can you comment on your stepmother's allegations?" "What allegations?" "She's claiming you forged your father's will and fabricated evidence of abuse. She says you're trying to steal money that rightfully belongs to her children." Cashin unlocked the storage unit and rolled up the door. The reporters pressed forward, trying to get shots of the sculpture and artwork inside. "Does this look like I need to steal from anyone?" he asked, gesturing to the millions of dollars worth of art his father had hidden away. "But Mrs. Halvorsen says." "Mrs. Halvorsen says a lot of things. Most of them are lies." Cashin pulled out his phone and showed them the video his father had recorded. "This is what my father said about her." His own words, recorded weeks before his death. "Judge for yourself who's telling the truth." The reporters huddled around the phone screen, their expressions shifting as they listened to Roland's testimony. When the video ended, the questions came rapid fire. "When was this recorded? Did your stepmother know about it? Will this be used in court? Have the police seen this evidence?" Cashin answered each question calmly and factually. No emotion, no editorializing, just the facts of what Lorna had done and how his father had fought back that BY evening. The story had taken on a life of its own. Local news stations led with the scandal. Social media buzzed with outrage. Art blogs dissected every detail of Roland's journals. And through it all, Lorna remained silent. Until 8 o'clock, when she called a press conference. Cashin watched it on the local news from his apartment. Lorna stood on the front steps of what used to be his father's house, flanked by Camber and Fleur. She wore a black dress and minimal makeup, projecting the image of a grieving widow under attack. "My family and I are devastated by the vicious lies being spread about my late husband and our marriage," she began, reading from a prepared statement. Roland was suffering from early-stage dementia and was easily manipulated by people who wanted to exploit his condition for financial gain. The camera zoomed in on her face as she dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Cashin Halvorsen abandoned his father years ago and only returned when he learned about his inheritance. The will he's presenting was obtained through coercion and manipulation of a confused elderly man. "We will fight these false claims in court and expose them for what they are, a cruel attempt to steal from Roland's true family." A reporter shouted a question. "What about the video recording where Mr. Halvorsen explicitly states his mental competence?" "That video was obviously coerced," Lorna replied. Roland was terrified of his son and would have said anything to avoid confrontation. "But the medical records show." "The medical records show exactly what I've been saying. Roland was on medication for anxiety and depression related to his cognitive decline. Anyone can read symptoms of mental illness as proof of competence if they want to manipulate the situation." More questions followed, but Lorna had said what she came to say. She retreated into the house, leaving the reporters on the lawn. Cashin turned off the television and reached for his phone. "Time for the nuclear option," that he called Jennifer Walsh. "I have something else for you," he said when she answered. "Something that's going to end this once and for all." The King County Courthouse buzzed with activity on Thursday morning. Media trucks lined the street outside. Reporters clustered around the main entrance. hoping to catch glimpses of the key players in what local news had dubbed the Halvorsen estate scandal. Cashin arrived early, before the crowds gathered. He met Louise and Patricia Walsh, his father's attorney, in a conference room on the third floor. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 60s who specialized in estate law and elder abuse cases. "How do you feel about our chances?" she asked, spreading documents across the table. "We're going to win," Cashin said. "The question is how badly Lorna wants to lose." "She's hired Robert Kim," Louise said. "Expensive defense attorney. Specializes in high-profile fraud cases. Let me guess he's going to claim Dad was mentally incompetent and I manipulated him. That's exactly his strategy. Kim's good at creating reasonable doubt, even when the evidence is overwhelming." Patricia pulled out a thick folder. "Then it's a good thing we have this." "What is it?" "The complete records from Davidson Security. The private investigator Lorna hired to follow your father." Patricia smiled grimly. "Mr. Davidson was very cooperative once we explained that he might be charged as an accessory to elder abuse." She opened the folder to reveal dozens of photographs. Roland walking into First National Bank. Roland meeting with Patricia at a coffee shop. Roland visiting the storage facility where he had hidden his artwork. Lorna knew everything. Patricia continued. She knew about the new will, the hidden storage unit, even the video recording. "Davidson's final report is dated 3 days before your father's death." Cashin studied the photographs. His father looked thin and tired in every shot, but his movements were purposeful and alert. These weren't the actions of a confused old man. "So she let him die knowing he had outmaneuvered her," Louise said. "Worse than that." Patricia pulled out another document. "Look at this." It was a legal petition, pre-filled but never filed. A request to have Roland declared mentally incompetent, with Lorna appointed as his legal guardian. She was planning to have him committed, Cashin said. The petition was prepared 4 days before his death. If he had lived another week, she would have filed it and taken complete control of his life. Then he would have been trapped. Completely. No access to his bank accounts, no ability to change his will, no legal standing to make his own decisions. She would have owned him. The courtroom filled quickly when the hearing began at 10 o'clock. Lorna sat at the defendant's table with her high-priced attorney, looking composed and confident. Camber and Fleur sat in the gallery behind her, both dressed conservatively for once. On the other side of the courtroom, Cashin sat with his legal team. He had chosen to wear one of his father's blazers, charcoal gray, with silver buttons. It was too big in his shoulders, but it felt right. Judge Margaret Torres called the court to order. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to estate disputes and her particular distaste for elder abuse cases. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of 2 competing wills," she began. "Mr. Kim, you may present your opening statement." Robert Kim stood and approached the bench. He was younger than Cashin had expected, probably mid-40s, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit. "Your Honor, this case is about a predatory son who returned to manipulate his vulnerable father for financial gain. Roland Halvorsen was suffering from documented cognitive decline and was easily influenced by family members who exploited his confusion and fear." Kim gestured toward Cashin. "The defendant has presented a will that was allegedly signed just months before Mr. Halvorsen's death, at a time when medical records clearly show he was struggling with memory issues and taking medication that affected his judgment. What evidence do you have of cognitive decline?" Judge Torres asked. "Medical records showing prescriptions for antipsychotic medication, testimony from family members about erratic behavior, and a pattern of isolation from his support network that coincides with increased contact from his estranged son." Ms. Walsh, your response. Patricia stood. "Your Honor, we will prove that Mrs. Halvorsen systematically isolated, manipulated, and abused her husband in order to gain control of his estate. The medical records Mr. Kim references show medications that were prescribed based on false information provided by Mrs. Halvorsen herself. That's a serious accusation. We have video testimony from Mr. Halvorsen himself, recorded just weeks before his death, explicitly stating his mental competence and describing his wife's manipulation. We also have 18 months of detailed journals documenting her psychological abuse. Judge Torres looked intrigued. I'll hear the evidence. Mr. Kim, call your first witness. Kim started with Dr. Amanda Chun, the physician who had prescribed Roland's medications. She was a nervous woman in her 30s who clearly regretted getting involved in the case. Dr. Chun, what was your assessment of Mr. Halvorson's mental state in his final months? Based on information provided by his wife, I believed he was experiencing early-stage dementia with associated anxiety and paranoid ideation. And you prescribed medication accordingly? Yes, risperidone to manage the paranoid thoughts and lorazepam for anxiety. Did Mr. Halvorson ever dispute his wife's account of his symptoms? Dr. Chin hesitated, expressed confusion about why he needed the medications. But patients with cognitive decline often lack insight into their condition. Patricia stood for cross-examination. Dr. Chun, did you ever examine Mr. Halvorson alone, without his wife present? No. Mrs. Halvorson was always with him. She said he became agitated when left alone with strangers. Did you ever speak to Mr. Halvorson's other family members about his condition? Mrs. Halvorson said he was estranged from his son and didn't want other family involved in his care. Did you ever conduct cognitive testing to confirm the dementia diagnosis? Another hesitation. Mrs. Halvorson felt that formal testing would be too stressful for him in his condition. So your entire diagnosis was based on second-hand reports from Mrs. Halvorson? Ah, yes, but she was his primary caregiver and knew him best. Did you know that Mrs. Halvorson was the primary beneficiary of her husband's will? I don't see how that's relevant to his medical care. It means she had a $3 million motivation to convince you her husband was mentally incompetent. Kim objected, but the damage was done. Dr. Chin looked sick as she left the witness stand. The next witness was Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor. Kim tried to use her testimony to support claims of Roland's erratic behavior, but Patricia's cross-examination revealed the source of the information. Mrs. Patterson, when you observed Mr. Halvorson acting confused or agitated, was Mrs. Halvorson present? Usually yes. And did these episodes occur more frequently when Mrs. Halvorson was around? Well, now that you mention it, yes. He seemed calmer when she wasn't there. Did you ever see him acting confused when he was alone? No. When I spoke to him over the fence or at the mailbox, he seemed perfectly normal. Sharp even. Kim's case was falling apart, but he had one more card to play. He called Camber to the stand. Camber, you lived in a house with your mother and stepfather. Did you observe signs of Mr. Halvorson's cognitive decline? Definitely. He was always forgetting things, getting confused about where he was. Mom had to watch him constantly to make sure he didn't hurt himself. Did he ever express paranoid thoughts about your mother? All the time. He accused her of stealing from him, hiding his things, turning people against him. It was really sad to see. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. Camber, how much time did you actually spend with Mr. Halvorson? I don't know. We lived in the same house. That's not what I asked. How many conversations did you have with him in his final 6 months? Camber shifted uncomfortably. A few. A few? Can you be more specific? Maybe 10 or 15. 10 or 15 conversations in 6 months with someone you claim to have observed constantly. I was busy with school and work. Actually, you weren't in school, were you? You dropped out of community college 2 years ago. I was working on my business. Your cryptocurrency trading, you mean? The activity that lost your mother $12,000 last year. Kim objected, but Patricia had made her point. Camber was an unreliable witness with his own financial motivations. When it was Patricia's turn to present evidence, she started with a video recording. The courtroom went silent as Roland's image appeared on the large monitor. His voice filled the room, clear and strong despite his physical frailty. For 10 minutes, he methodically described Lorna's manipulation, the false medical claims, the systematic isolation from his support network. When the video ended, Judge Torres was staring at Lorna with undisguised contempt. Mrs. Halvorson, you'll have an opportunity to respond to these allegations, she said. But I should warn you that video testimony from the deceased carries significant weight in probate proceedings. Patricia followed with excerpts from Roland's journals, the Davidson security surveillance reports, and a prepared but unfiled petition for guardianship. Each piece of evidence built on the last, creating an overwhelming picture of calculated abuse. When Kim tried to cross-examine the handwriting expert who had authenticated the journals, he only succeeded in reinforcing their legitimacy. So these journals are definitely in Mr. Halvorson's handwriting? Kim asked, without question. The writing shows no signs of coercion or mental impairment. In fact, it's remarkably consistent and detailed for someone allegedly suffering from dementia. The hearing lasted 6 hours. When both sides had presented their evidence, Judge Torres called a 30-minute recess to review the materials. Cashin sat in the hallway with Luis and Patricia, watching Lorna huddle with her attorney near the courthouse windows. She looked smaller than before, diminished by the weight of evidence against her. "How do you think we did?" Luis asked. "We destroyed them," Patricia said confidently. "That video recording alone is enough to invalidate their entire case." When court reconvened, Judge Torres looked directly at Lorna as she delivered her ruling. This court finds that Roland Halvorson was mentally competent at the time he executed his final will and testament. The evidence presented shows a clear pattern of psychological manipulation and elder abuse perpetrated by Mrs. Lorna Halvorson against her husband. Lorna's face went white. Furthermore, this court finds that Mrs. Halvorson knowingly presented an outdated will while concealing knowledge of the newer document. This constitutes fraud and conspiracy to deprive the rightful heir of his inheritance. Judge Torres signed the official order. The estate is awarded in its entirety to Cashin Halvorson, effective immediately. Mrs. Halvorson has 30 days to vacate the property and remove her personal belongings. The gavel came down with finality. Lorna stood slowly, her composure finally cracking. She looked across the courtroom at Cashin with pure hatred in her eyes. "You think you've won," she said, her voice carrying in the silent room. "But you'll never be half the man your father was." Cashin met her gaze without flinching. "You're right," he said. "I'm better." 6 weeks later, Cashin stood in the main gallery of the Seattle Art Museum, watching workers install his father's final sculpture. Ascendancy dominated the center of the room, its bronze surface gleaming under the museum's lighting system. The sculpture was magnificent, but it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were paintings, sketches, and smaller pieces that told the story of Roland's artistic evolution. And along the far wall, in glass cases, were pages from his journals documenting Lorna's systematic abuse. The museum director, Patricia Stevens, approached him with a satisfied smile. "It's extraordinary," she said. "The most powerful exhibition we've mounted in years." "Dad would have loved this," Cashin said. "He always wanted his work displayed here. The opening is next week. We're expecting our largest crowd in the museum's history." Cashin nodded, still staring at the sculpture. The bronze figures seemed to be reaching not just toward the sky, but toward something beyond hope, perhaps, or redemption. "The legal proceedings are finished?" Patricia asked. "Yesterday, Lorna was sentenced to 2 years for elder abuse and fraud. Camber got 18 months for wire fraud. He tried to sell some of Dad's pieces before the estate was settled. Fleur got probation and community service. And the civil suits settled out of court. They agreed to pay restitution to cover Dad's medical expenses and legal fees. Not that any of them have much money left after their legal bills." Patricia checked her watch. "The foundation paperwork should be finalized by next week. Have you decided on the first round of grants?" "Luis is handling that. We're starting with 5 young artists, plus funding for a mental health awareness program." Exactly what Dad wanted to do before. He didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to. He'd be proud of you," Patricia said gently. "I hope so." Luis appeared at Cashin's elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the museum cafe. "The placard is installed," he said, handing Cashin a cup. They walked over to read the brass plate mounted beside Ascendancy. This sculpture was created by Roland Halvorson, 1954 to 2024. In the final months of his life, while enduring systematic psychological abuse from those who sought to exploit his artistic legacy for financial gain. Hidden away to protect it from those who would have sold it for profit, Ascendancy represents both the triumph of artistic vision over commercial exploitation and the power of truth to survive even the most determined attempts to suppress it. Below that, in smaller text, donated by the Halvorsen Foundation in memory of Roland Halvorsen and in support of artistic freedom and elder protection advocacy. And at the bottom, a quote from Roland's journals. Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's who you trusted to carry it forward. Perfect, Cashin said. They spent another hour walking through the exhibition, making final adjustments to the lighting and placement. As they prepared to leave, Luis touched Cashin's arm. Any regrets? He asked. Cashin looked back at his father's life work, now preserved and protected for future generations. He thought about Lorna, sitting in a minimum security prison, her reputation destroyed and her schemes exposed. He thought about Camber and Fleur, learning the hard way that actions have consequences. She buried him once, he said finally. I just made sure they didn't bury his truth. They walked out of the museum together, into the Seattle afternoon. Behind them, Ascendancy reached toward the skylight, eternal and unbroken. Cashin didn't forgive. He didn't move on, he moved forward. On his own terms.